Listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. This is Nick Jones from Jones & Associates Premier Financial Solutions, bringing our show to you again today. Lots of great information we're talking about, but if you have information that you'd like to discuss with our firm, you can reach out to us in a couple of different ways. You can go to jonesfinancialtalk.com or give us a call at 541-500-4321 to ask any questions you might have. We've been discussing in the first segment of our show 401k rollovers and advantages and disadvantages of doing that in much detail. And hopefully we are giving you lots of great details and not boring you with this specific topic. There's my co-host, Mr. Tony Shore, to help us continue to explore this great topic.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Nick, I'm never bored when you talk. It's always interesting stuff. And the thing about it is I know how important it is. So I pay attention, and I'm sure our listeners get a lot out of it, especially last week's show. The first part of this topic, you really dug into 401k rollovers and what options you have, whether you leave a company and what to do with that 401k. And I got the impression that probably one of the things that most people don't want to do or shouldn't do is just leave it at the old company, right? There are some better options out there for most people, and I think that's good. You talked about moving it into your current or your new 401k at your new employer, or rolling it over into an IRA. So we talked about a lot, but before we jump back into that topic, Nick, I have to ask, how have you been? Are you keeping busy over there, meeting with a lot of clients and stuff?
Well, definitely. Annually, we are busy almost all year long. Summer's a little slower because people like vacation and everything, But we are very, very busy. I'm very thankful that lots of people call us and tell us that they listen to us on the show. There's lots of people that are able to listen to the different topics we discuss, and that continues to drum up some new business from time to time. And so we're pretty busy, and but we do our best to get back to everybody as quickly as we can and help them with whatever concerns they might have. Tony.
Yeah, and I know you have a great team over there at Jones and Associates, and good people. So I encourage our listeners out there, if they have questions, to just pick up the phone and give you a call, set up a consultation with you and your staff. That number is 541-500-4321. I love that number, 500-4321. That's great. And Nick, I'm just excited. My Vikings have been doing pretty good.
Niners too so far.
Yeah, well, and this show will air on the day that the Vikings played. It was last week. That was last Sunday that the Vikings played the Niners. So, you guys look like a good team. Like you could go all the way. I mean, I always want to see somebody different in there, but man, the Niners and Chiefs, I think you got this thing figured out. So we'll see what the Vikings can do the rest of the season.
Chiefs are trying for the three-peat. First time in 50 years or something? I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. I think the Niners can throw a wrench into that. I think they really can.
We'd like to see it. The advantage of being in Oregon is we don't have a team, so you can vote and root for whoever you want.
Right. Right. Well, I grew up in Minnesota, so don't listeners and viewers out there, don't be hating on me. But yes, I am a Minnesota Vikings fan. I'm sure I happen to know a lot of Vikings fans in Oregon too. So that's good. Hopefully we'll have a decent year this year. We don't really have a quarterback, but we'll see how it goes. Now, the show today, it's part 2. Last week, I think we ended the show, Nick. You were talking about the advantages. There are pros and cons, but you were talking about the pros to actually leaving your money in your work 401k where you're working. So if you're currently employed and your employer offers a 401k, there are many reasons to keep that 401k going and not roll it over. I would say making sure you're getting the employer match has to be one of them, right? I don't think we mentioned the match.
Yep, we didn't get to that part yet. You're right. So the match is a huge part, but also the logistics of being a current employee do have some advantages. You have access to the money, maybe in the form of a loan. We talked a little bit about that. There are many different ways that you can take your minimum distributions out of the accounts. They do provide different options to be able to access the funds at an earlier age than 59 and a half. And depending on what you have the ability to invest in might be advantage as well. There's lots of people locally that I know of that work for companies that are publicly traded and do give them the ability to own their own company stock in the 401k. And so depending on all of those different things, it may be a huge advantage to just leave things alone and keep your money invested at the current 401k, with your employer. A lot of that, Tony, I think probably comes down to one main thing, and it's based on the age and if you're continuing to work for them or not. Okay. So if you've left them as an employee, which I think we're going to talk a lot about the things that you want to look at if you're going to do a rollover from a 401k to an IRA. We're going to talk a lot about that in this show. If you're not an employee there any longer, you don't have as many benefits, and maybe you don't have any cost advantages, and you're old enough to move the money, there might not be many specific reasons why you would not want to consider doing something different.
Right.
And I'd say that's the majority of the time that people reach out to us. I mean, clearly we talk to younger clients that maybe have had multiple jobs and want to consolidate. But for the most part, I'd say the majority, 90% of the people that call our firm that are not clients already are between the ages of 60 and 65, and they're thinking about retiring, and they're looking forward to talking to somebody about the huge nest egg that they've had and what the advantages are and what are the things that they should consider with the biggest single asset that they have other than their home, pretty much, their retirement accounts.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's so important to do it right. Work with a financial professional like yourself. You don't want to go it alone. Again, just after last week's show, talking about all the different ins and outs, rules and regulations, the penalties, the taxes. You don't want to make a costly mistake. Work with a financial pro, someone like yourself, Nick, to help get that done right if you're going to roll it over. But if people are thinking about retirement, like you say, if they're in their 50s or early 60s, yeah, they might be prime to, hey, do they need a Roth IRA? Should they be taking advantage of that right now because of the low tax rates? If transferring from a regular 401k, a lot of older people have regular 401ks yet, because Roth 401ks are a relatively new thing just over the last few years. So
that's right.
If you have it in a traditional 401k, 403b, or 457, those are tax deferred accounts. And if you leave them in a tax deferred account, you're going to have to pay taxes in retirement on that. And that could put you in a higher tax bracket or create a tax burden you're not prepared for. So maybe Roth IRA conversion is the answer, right?
So Tony, you've mentioned so many things in that last, say, 20 to 30 seconds.
Sure.
No, it's great though. And I think the majority of what I would tell you to sum it up is this: how much control do you want to have over the money that you've worked hard and saved? Okay. Because that's what all of those questions are the answer to, right? If you take the money and you move it from the 401k into an IRA, there's lots of advantages if it's done correctly. Okay. And so let's highlight a couple of those that you mentioned. One,
Sure.
investment options. I mean, what you have the ability to invest in your 401k is limited to what your plan sponsor or your employer chooses for you, which are typically 20 to 40 different mutual funds, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so there's thousands of different options that are available. And depending on the client's scenario, it's a very easy thing for me to find after talking with them and doing very much diligence, better solutions that they would want to consider to help diversify some of that money, if not all of it. Okay. And so the investment options are a huge thing and a huge reason why people consider moving to somewhere else. Just having the diversification and having the ability to use products and services that are just not even close to being available inside your plan. And listeners, look, I've been doing this for 24 years. I do so many rollovers a year. I fill out tons of paperwork that explains why we're adequately doing this and appropriately doing this for our clients and our prospects. So many times the investments that you're currently utilizing in your 401k are all the same. I mean, I know what all of them are already because I've seen how they're all built,
Yeah.
and if they're just kind of cookie cutter plans that an employer that's got too many employees and doesn't have the ability to put the time and energy into customizing a plan for them is doing, that's how those plans are built. And so most of the time when you look at portfolios that are built outside of 401k plans, they already know what's in those plans and they are doing their best to beat those maybe investment returns or maybe adding on features to something that they can utilize to put clients in a better situation.
Sure.
So it's a very well-known industry. And the investment options is probably one of the biggest things that you want to consider reasons for moving your money into an IRA.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody's going to be fortunate enough to work for a company that has someone like you overseeing and your staff overseeing their 401k, where you're more active. A lot of these bigger companies, you're not involved at all. Nobody's going to be talking to you really. There's at the open enrollment meeting once a year your company has, they're going to get up there and ramble on, and it's going to, your eyes will fog over.
Yep.
And then that's it. But you're right. You have more investment options and it's more customizable if you put it in an IRA and work with a financial advisor than if you just leave it in your 401k at work.
That's right.
That's what you're saying.
That's right. And there's always ways to make money no matter what the stock market's doing. There's tons of different alternative investments that you can utilize. They're just not available inside a current plan typically. Okay.
Right.
So that's big. But another one that comes to mind that I hear all the time, Tony, is the ownership of my account. Okay. So
what do you mean by that?
So if you think about an employer plan, like, who owns the assets? It's the qualified plan trust that owns the assets. And yes, you are a participant of that plan, right? That's bound by their constraints.
But it's a group trust.
It's not a group trust, right? Whereas an individual retirement account for that specific name, individual, is ownership by you. And that gives you just a different feeling and sense of ownership, clearly, when you decide to go that route. A huge thing that's tied to that, Tony, is the beneficiary options, as an example. Okay, so you're going to have much more flexibility in an IRA to be able to organize the beneficiaries the way that you want them, and for your beneficiaries to designate things the way that they want to do things going forward as well. Versus inside an employer plan, the plan is the one who stipulates and controls the ability to name the beneficiaries and who can do that, right? A perfect example, spouses typically don't work at the same company. If something happens to your spouse and the money's in a 401k at their employer plan, there are different advantages to being able to take that money and utilize it over their life and organize it differently in the form of an IRA than there is in the 401k plan that's currently sitting there.
Sure.
So all of those things are, again, reasons why you would want to consider and maybe having advantages on using the rollover IRA.
Yeah. 401k plans and 403b plans, they have constraints that an individual retirement account or an IRA does not have. And like blackout periods, things like that, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Blackout periods. Also, the ability to be able to take money out before the age of 59 and a half is a big one. Okay. And so IRS early withdrawal penalties, right? So that's 10% typically if you're under the age of 59 and a half. But there are different reasons in both a 401k plan and an IRA that give you the ability to withdraw funds without a penalty. You just have to know what the tax code is, have to know how to adequately do it, and have to follow what the IRS has already written down.
Right.
Okay. So,
And what you're taking it out for can make a difference.
That's right.
Too.
I mean, there are advantages. You can take money out for medical expenses and first-time home purchases, for example, in an IRA. That's more difficult to do inside a 401k.
Yeah.
Now, if you're still an employee there, maybe you've got that loan option that we talked about earlier, which is a big advantage. Okay. But I'm talking about pretty much for most people that have left their employer and are no longer working. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason why you can't take a loan typically once you've left is because you pay it back through payroll. And if you're not working any longer, you're not getting paid. So you can't pay it back. Does that make sense?
Yep. That makes perfect sense. And I never thought about, so that's the ownership bit. But when you said beneficiary designations, I wasn't really aware that there was a limitation on beneficiary options with a 401k versus an IRA. But that's a good one to know and to think about. A lot of people probably don't think about that. And that's what these accounts, that's a big part of these accounts, is making sure, if, as you get older, you or your spouse or both might pass, and you want to make sure that beneficiary designation, you can change it quickly and it can go where you want it to go, and it's not a hassle.
Not all retirement accounts are created equal. If you think about the way that a 401k plan is structured and written, it is a contract that the employer puts in place for the participants, their employees, going forward. That's way different than opening an individual retirement account where you have the control and ability to do what you want to do. Now, you have to follow IRS guidelines clearly, but I mean, the limitations are much less restrictive, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, for sure. And again, let's touch on the penalty aspect of this. That 10% penalty, when you're talking about some of these amounts that are in these retirement plans, that 10% penalty can be huge. So any way to avoid that, you're going to want to do that. And that's one reason why I would never mess with any of it without working with a financial advisor to protect me from making that mistake.
Yep. I had a client just this week that I sat down with, and, she wanted to buy some property, and she started talking to me about this 6 months ago, and she just turned 59. And, she didn't even realize that if she just waited an additional 6 months, she waived the 10% penalty because she'd be 59 and a half. Right. Yeah. And so all of these little technicalities can really affect things, especially if you're taking a distribution of 10, 20, 30, $40,000 out. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. The tax liability on that money that you would take out, plus a 10% penalty on top of the taxes you'd have to pay.
Yep.
If it's a tax different, unless it's a Roth, but that's huge.
The other thing is thinking about penalties and just thinking about the way that codes are written. If you're not up to speed on what's happening politically, like with the CARES Act and when COVID was around and all of the different ramifications there, there was tons of different advantages written into both 401k and IRA planning during a 2 or 3 year period that, if you knew about them, could really take advantage. Okay. And so here's what I always tell clients. And prospects, I should say. If you want to work with a financial advisor, somebody like me, they better be able to show you how they're going to add value. They better be able to tell you that they're going to try to put you in a better situation than you're in today, and for what reason.
Right.
And all of those value adds are why you decide to work with somebody. It's not, here's the money, try to figure it out, and they just take it and they invest it and do something different with it. Like, the last thing that I talk to clients about is what we're going to invest their money in. It's, what are their goals? What are we trying to accomplish? What everybody has a very specific situation based on their age, based on their income, based on their asset level, based on their vision, right? Yeah. And all of that is how you determine if it's correct for you to do a rollover or not in the first place. Yeah. Sometimes it's not right, Tony.
Right. Like sometimes people want the bulk of their money for the end of their life or for their to go to their children. Sometimes people's goals for retirement, when you sit down, they're like, okay, we're going to need a big chunk of this money right up front when we retire because we're going to buy an RV and we're going to travel the country. Yep. Well, I mean, you can spend $1 million on an RV. You can spend anywhere from $150,000 to $1 million on a really nice tour bus RV. So, I mean, that's a lot of money. So, and if you're going to need that right away, I know one thing you look at is when they will need the money, and that will help you decide what type of account it should be in and when, right?
That's exactly right. Which brings me to another point that you just kind of highlighted. The taxation of these accounts and how to get the money out most efficiently. Obviously, if you're working, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but if you're working with the right financial advisor, then they should be giving you some great ideas on ways to save, not just with with what we're talking about, but different creative strategies that are totally legal with the IRS. Roth conversions, for instance, right? We talk about that all the time. I just talked to a prospect today and I said, tell me your situation. Okay. I'm 65 years old. I have $500,000 in my retirement accounts. I'm living on Social Security and making plenty of money. I'm not going to touch this money, but I know that in 5 to 10 years, the IRS is going to make me start taking my required minimum distributions. I need help. Okay, well, let's look at your income level. Let's move the money from the 401k to an IRA. Let's do Roth conversions for the next 10 years to draw down, right, all of the money that's in that account. Okay, so you don't have to be subject to RMDs. You've already paid the taxes. You want the money to go to your kids. Like, boom, I just threw out a perfect example of a reason why you would want to consider doing that.
Yeah.
And that's very, very specific to somebody that has a very specific goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And maybe you want to, because of required minimum distributions on traditional retirement accounts, like a traditional IRA, you might want to do that Roth conversion because, and then spread out that tax burden, start taking some money out now and pay small amounts of taxes on it each year rather than let it build and build and build. And then once those RMDs start, you got to pay huge tax chunks, and it adds to your, it could affect other things. If you have to take that RMD and it bumps you up into a higher tax bracket, that could affect what you pay for Medicaid or Medicare, I should say, Medicare.
Yeah, there are 5 or 6 different Medicare premium levels based on your income. And, a lot of people say, well, when I retire, I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket. And that could be very true for many people. But what if it's not? I mean, the biggest thing that's debatable this year with the new presidential candidates that are going to get in is going to be taxation, because taxes are going to change in the end of 2025 compared to how they are today.
Yeah.
Congress has to do something. And so what if they go up to a point where you're in a higher tax bracket 10 years from now than you are right now?
Yeah.
I mean, so the point is, you got to have those conversations. You got to be talking to somebody. Yeah. And, a lot of people, Tony, automatically think that if they're going to try to sit down and work with a financial advisor, it's going to be very costly, and that's a mistake, because the advisor is going to try to get compensation and benefit from them. And so let's talk about that. That's incredibly important. If you are reaching out to multiple firms and you're giving them your nest egg to work with, I hope that they're talking to you about their fee structure and how it's organized.
Yeah, they need to be transparent up front. And if they're not, or you feel there's any hedging or weirdness, that's a warning sign.
Yep. And you need to be able to understand exactly where you are. So what we do is we specifically outline exactly what you're paying today inside your regular plan that you're involved in. We show you and break down all the expenses so you can see them. Okay. If our fee is higher for some reason than what you're paying today, we're going to explain to you and justify why it is and why you would even want to consider that.
Yeah.
But it's got to be part of the conversation. You have to know how the advisor gets paid. You have to know what you're going to pay on an annual basis or regular basis to them, depending on the structure that you have with them. And if they're a true fiduciary, they're going to point that out and explain it to you. And are they incented to sell specific products over others? How do you know that? You better ask those questions if you really want to have the best, broadest investment opportunity and plan.
Yeah.
And there's tons of different products out there and tons of different ways that you can work with financial advisors. And so the point I'm trying to make here is, every single time I sit down with a new prospect, if they don't ask me the question, I explain the fees and how it works. And I'm not scared of it, because you know what? I want them to know up front. We want to be honest and explain and be a true fiduciary. And I'm writing all of that down, right? And all the paperwork that we are providing to them and that we're putting together so that they know. And you never see that. Like, let me ask you this, listeners, how many of you know exactly what you're paying today for the 401k plan that you have? Or how many of you know, if you're working with a financial advisor, how they've been compensated and what they are charging you for different investments? Very few people can answer that. It's so confusing, but it doesn't have to be.
No.
And a lot of people assume, oh, I'm going to sit down with a financial advisor and they're going to tell me just to roll my money over so they get paid. Well, that's part of the conversation. You need to have that conversation with them. You need to tell them what your concerns are and see how they address it. And if they can't answer that adequately, go get a second opinion with somebody that will, and somebody that's honest.
And I know the things you do for your clients, I mean, the costly mistakes you help them avoid with their investments and their retirement income. I mean, it more than makes up for what the fee would be to work with a financial advisor. I mean, you can make so many very costly mistakes. I mean, with Social Security maximization, healthcare, your investment options, it just, doubling up on the wrong stocks. I mean, without somebody actively looking at these things, who's going to look out for your best interest based on your situation. I mean, it's just, it's astronomical, the amount of money that you could end up losing. You can make really costly mistakes. And that's the biggest reason I work with financial advisor and recommend people do, because avoid those costly mistakes. I mean, that's you don't know what you don't know.
That's
and
right.
Most of us are only going to go through this process once with our retirement accounts and retirement planning. And you do it every day, you and your staff and your team there at Jones and Associates. Your team does it every day. And the rest of us are only going to go through that process once. So I'm not going to rely on, the internet or my next door neighbor whose situation is different than mine, the advice of a coworker. I'm going to rely on a professional, just like I would with a doctor or a mechanic. Right.
Yep. And there are so many different ways to do things effectively in this industry, and one size doesn't fit all. That's
right.
That's the point here. And so, but it could. If it does, then you should expect that person is going to tell you that. And I have told many prospects that I really appreciate the opportunity, but you know what? I think you'd be in a better position for this reason if you just stayed put. And that is the answer in some of these situations.
Sure.
Fair to be fair and honest and upfront.
Yep. Well, hey, we're out of time once again for the show, but before we go, let our listeners out there know how they can get a hold of you if they want to, if they have some questions or they want to set up a consultation.
Sure thing. Two main ways, listeners, I should say. You can just go ahead and give us a call at 541-500-4321. Or go to jonesfinancialtalk.com and request that information right online. Lots of great useful tools on there as well. Lots of things that we talk about on the show. I've got plenty of literature for you to consider and look through, and try to answer all those questions you might have. So thank you very much again for listening.
All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much. Great show today. And the listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of Jones Financial Talk with our host, Nick Jones.